as we inch closer and closer to Godzilla King of the Monsters at the end of the month, I'm going to continue my series of videos paying tribute to Godzilla's monster co-stars in that upcoming film. And next on the list is the newly crowned Queen of the Monsters, Mothra. You can see right here on the shirt, right here on top. Mothra, yeah, they're calling her the Queen of the Monsters as part of the marketing for this film, so I'm assuming that's a title that's going to be used in the film itself. But Mothra has a very interesting place in Godzilla's history and in the history of Toho's giant monster family and their cinematic science fiction. But before I go into the details of Mothra's career, as it were, I guess we could call it a career, Mothra, when I was a kid, Mothra was a character that I put into the same camp as Superman and the Ultimate Warrior. Now, what on earth did Superman, the Ultimate Warrior, and Mothra all have in common? I hated all three of them. That was, as a young child, I hated all three of them with a passion, and for very superficial reasons. I hated Superman because Batman was my favorite, and fuck Superman. In my young mind, like, Batman is the best, and Superman can go eat a dick. I have since come around, and Superman is a superhero that I actually appreciate a lot, and Superman over the years has actually become one of my favorites. All-Star Superman, one of my favorite comics of all time. The Ultimate Warrior, and I think if you knew me as a child, you know immediately where I'm going with this. I hated him because he beat Hogan at WrestleMania 6, and I was a Hogan guy as a young child, so I remember watching Ultimate Warrior beat Hogan, and I just kind of sat there with my arms crossed, like, I don't like this. I don't like him. Don't like him. And as a child, that was enough to get me to hate Ultimate Warrior. And nowadays, I've actually come around. I won't say that I become a fan of the Ultimate Warrior necessarily, but I fully understand why he was popular, why he got over, and why so many people remember him fondly. And I've actually been one of the ones that, for all the shit that he gets, the bad reputation that he has among the fans for being a bad worker or whatever, I've come around on the Ultimate Warrior. It's like, yeah, limited worker, but he had a character that he played to the hilt, and it's easy to see why the fans loved him so much. And Mothra, why did I hate Mothra? Because the third Godzilla movie I ever saw was Godzilla vs. The Thing, or Mothra vs. Godzilla, as it's more commonly known as now. And this was the third Godzilla movie I ever saw. First I saw King Kong vs. Godzilla, which I really enjoyed. Then I saw Godzilla Raids Again, which thoroughly confused me. And up to this point, Godzilla lost in both movies. And then I see Godzilla going up against this butterfly, and no, I had not seen the original Mothra prior to this. I was like, okay, Godzilla's gotta win this one, right? And he kills the adult Mothra, but then the egg hatches, and the two Mothra larvae come out, and they defeat Godzilla. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this is getting ridiculous. I've become a fan of Godzilla, and I'm watching him lose all the time. And this time he loses to two baby caterpillars? That's bullshit. Whatever the 5-year-old equivalent of that's bullshit is, that's what I was saying. And I was just so enraged that Mothra beat Godzilla. Now, try explaining to a 5-year-old, it's like, look, Patrick, Godzilla's the bad monster, so Mothra has to win, or else the movie just kind of ends on a downer. And I'm like, you can't explain that to 5-year-old me. It wouldn't make any sense. Now, do I still feel that way about Mothra? Absolutely not. I've completely come around on Mothra, and as I've gotten older, I've appreciated Mothra for quite a few reasons. I've accepted her place as the second most popular monster in Godzilla's monster family, second only to the king himself, and she's the only one that's really branched out and gotten her own movie series after being crossed over into the Godzilla series. So she's proven to have some longevity, but really what makes her stand out among all the other monsters in the series is that she originally began, and her original film was in 1961, which I did see as a kid and I hated because I hated Mothra. I remember watching the original Mothra film and just sitting there like, oh, look at you. Yeah, you think you're so great. And God, I was so immature back then. But and yeah, like I'm mature now, right? But what really set Mothra apart away from Godzilla and Rodan and all the other monsters that were coming out at the time is that the other monsters were scarier and uglier. Mothra was more cutesy and had a much softer and more beautiful design. Most of the monsters were strictly destroyers. Mothra started off as a destroyer, but one with a justified rage against humanity because they destroyed her island and then took her two heralds, the two fairies, away from her. And the humanity was basically positioned as the villain in the original Mothra film. And while all the other monsters were more based in science fiction, Mothra, while there is science fiction there, Mothra had a big foot in the realm of fantasy as well, and kind of opened up the genre to new possibilities. Now that we have magic singing fairies, there's always been more of a fantastical element to Mothra's character. And I guess you could say that Godzilla had that too with some of the religious aspects, but it was a lot more closely tied to Mothra. And I think involving Mothra in the monster family kind of added a whole new dynamic that Rodan didn't bring to the table, that Ghidorah didn't bring to the table, that Varan didn't bring to the table. So she definitely made her own mark and had a unique identity, because no other monster looks like her and no other monster quite has the personality of her. And actually, as the years have gone on, as the series has developed, and as these monsters have become more and more legendary, Mothra has become kind of the moral compass of the monsters. And that really began with me, where I started to see Mothra as that, was in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, when Mothra was the one that had to talk Godzilla and Rodan into putting aside their differences and fighting the greater threat in King Ghidorah. And since then, Mothra has been seen as the protector and the guiding light, and the main good monster, regardless of what side Godzilla's on. And Godzilla can be a protector or a destroyer, depending on what movie you're making. But if you make Mothra the villain, it doesn't feel right. And that's a role that Mothra should never play. And I just feel like Mothra is the moral compass of the monsters. And it's a very interesting role that she's gotten for herself. And it's one of the reasons I think she's kind of endured as long as she has. There's a purity to her that a lot of the other monsters don't have. And there's like a inherent legitimate goodness to her that the other monsters don't have. So I think there's a lot of qualities to Mothra that helps her stand out among all the other monsters that Toho created, and there's no one else quite like her, and I think she deserves a lot of credit for that. And I talked about it a little bit in the Rodan video, but Mothra's popularity has really endured. I know that Godzilla vs. Mothra in 1992, which isn't one of my favorite entries, but was wildly successful at the box office in Japan, and that led to her getting her own trilogy after the Godzilla series had concluded. And in the Millennium film, she came back a handful of times. So she really did position herself as Toho positioned her really as she's the number two. I mean, when I heard the behind the scenes production of Giant Monsters All Out Attack, and how it was originally supposed to be Baragon, Varan, and Anguirus, and Toho wanted higher profile monsters involved in that story. It's no surprise that they picked King Ghidorah and Mothra for those roles. And Mothra, is a big name that carries a lot of weight in the monster world. And it's one funny thing about Mothra, and I talked about a little bit in the Rodan video about how Mom was a fan of the original Rodan film. My mom. She was a fan of the original Rodan film, and that was something that she kind of passed on to me. My dad saw the original Mothra when he was younger, but he had a different experience with it than what Mom did with Rodan, where he saw the original Mothra on TV while he was in high school or college. And the thing that struck him the most were the two singing fairies, and he hated them immensely. It's like, they just do not shut up. I hate those fairies. And so whenever I would watch a movie with Mothra in it and the fairies would start singing, I could hear Dad just go, "Oh my God, those fairies." Interestingly enough, my parents felt the exact same way about Roger Rabbit. My siblings and I, we loved that movie and we watched it constantly. And every time we did, I could just hear my parents just go, "Oh my God, that damn rabbit." Because Roger annoyed them to holy hell. So Roger and Mothra have something in common. They annoyed my parents. But yeah, the singing fairies is, you almost can't imagine Mothra without the fairies. And the fairies haven't been in every single movie with Mothra in it, but it's an accepted part of the character that I know that they're not going to be featured in, at least I don't believe they are. They're not going to be in Godzilla King of the Monsters, but and that would have been a ballsy move, because it's like, if two singing fairies just show up in the middle of this this universe, like, our audience is even going to accept that. I mean, we would get it, like us monster fans, we would totally get it, but I think a lot of general audiences would go, what the fuck? Fairies? But if I were in charge of the project, I probably would have fought to put the fairies in the film, because it'd be like, come on, yeah, you can't have Mothra without the fairies, what are you doing? And my favorite version of the Mothra fairies were actually the originals, the Peanut Sisters. The Tiny Beauties, as they were called in the original film. They were, they were actually a singing pop duo back in the 60s. And so if you're going to be singing for most of the film, it's pretty important that they actually know how to sing, and they were very good at it. I mean, their renditions of the original Mothra song is classic. My favorite piece of music associated with Mothra is actually the tune Sacred Spring, which the fairies sing as the main characters of Godzilla vs. Mothra walk towards them when they're on Infant Island, and it's a beautiful song. My personal favorite piece of music associated with the character, and I thought they sang the best. I thought they carried the roles the best, especially as they developed from victims in the original Mothra film to basically political ambassadors and spokesperson for the monsters and active heroes in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Their role definitely evolved over the course of 3 films. And the fairies have never quite been as good since the Peanut Sisters stopped playing them, but they were a huge part of Mothra's history, and it would have been nice if they were included in the film, but I'm assuming they're not going to be there, but because I think there's a fear that too many people would think it's ridiculous. But I don't know. I mean, Michael Dougherty made Krampus, and he had evil gingerbread man in that movie. It's like, how much sillier is that? Are 2 twin fairies singing to a moth over that? But yeah, that's basically my take on Mothra, a monster that I absolutely hated in my youth, but I have grown to love over the years. And I appreciate what Mothra brings to the table, and the unique identity and attributes that she brings each time she's involved in a Godzilla movie, particularly as the moral compass, as the guiding light, as it were, of this universe. And hopefully that kind of comes back in Godzilla King of the Monsters. I would like to see... It looks like Mothra is going to be positioned as a good monster, which he absolutely should be, because that's... And it looks like, I'm guessing here, because obviously I haven't seen the movie yet, I'm guessing that Godzilla and Mothra are going to be allies in this film, which I'm totally on board with. It brings me back to the NES game, the NES Godzilla game, which I guess I could talk about that, Godzilla Monster of Monsters, where I think James Rolfe's assessment of that game is perfect. Every time you pick Mothra, the game just laughs at you, because Mothra sucks against the bosses in that game. She's great at the levels because she can just fly over everything, but once you get to the bosses, Mothra sucks. You go fight the bosses with Godzilla. But yeah, that's my take on the NES game. But yeah, Mothra is an iconic creature and one of the big icons of Godzilla's history and one of his biggest monster co-stars. So it was very exciting to hear that she was going to be included in Godzilla King of the Monsters, because I mean, if you're going to go with the heavy hitters, you can't go with too much heavier and too much more significant than the Queen of the Monsters, Mothra. So that wraps up I'm getting tongue-tied. That wraps up this video. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned, because I've got King Ghidorah's tribute coming up soon.